Today's webinar is titled Top Tips for Managing Data Storage Costs. So I'm going to start off with a stat which some will be aware of on this call, some might not, but even a conservative estimate says that your data storage needs will grow by 10 to 20% every single year. Now, I'm imagining that that's a cost curve that you don't want to be on. So the main reason being that it can simply just spiral out of control fast. And it might be the reason that you've decided to join us on the webinar today. So we're going to be asking what's driving this explosion. It could be inactive content you don't know what to do with. It could be rot that's piling up, so redundant, obsolete and trivial data. It could be unmanaged versioning, making files exponentially bigger. Polymer retention been touched in years. If any of that sounds familiar, you're not alone. Good news is we're looking to fix that today by guiding you through some top tips and recommendations. So our expert panel will share top tips to slash storage costs, tackle rot, modernize retention, and optimize your data estate for efficiency. And by the end of this session, you'll walk away with practical, actionable steps to stop paying for data you don't need and start managing what matters. And to also show you that if you're already paying for extra storage, there's an instant ROI to be had as well. Also, just for you as an audience, we will have a few Slido questions running live at a few points throughout the presentation. So get your phones ready for those so you can join in. And if you're ready, let's dive into it. So on the call today to guide you through, we've got the Cloud Essentials team of myself, Geoff Davis, Key Account Specialist. We've got Roche Wiedemann, Modern Work and Content Management Lead, and Johan van Schalkwijk, Managing Director and Head of Solutions at Cloud Essentials. Also joining us is Daniel Beck from AvePoint, and we're going to start with Dan, just to give you an introduction to himself and AvePoint and their partnership and working together with Cloud Essentials. So Dan, I'm going to pass it over to you first of all.
Thanks ever so much, Gethin, and thank you very much for inviting me to join today. For those on the call who haven't heard of AvePoint before, we're a global SaaS provider who support over 25 million users globally. As you can see, some key logos on the screen there that most of you will have heard of. Importantly, we do not sell directly to end users. We rely on a network of trusted partners and invested partners, of whom Cloud Essentials really are a key one. They've probably got more knowledge around our compliance and governance tools and storage optimization than most of our partners. Many partners know us mainly for backup, but the Cloud Essentials team are able to offer so much more. One of the key areas is storage optimization, which is going to be discussed today. Just to add on to Gethin's point there around the 10 to 20% growth on data storage, I actually ran a report yesterday internally. We manage thousands of tenants, and we actually looked at growth trends over the last 24 months. And what we've seen is that on average of all the tenants we're helping manage, we're actually seeing a 34.7% growth in data volumes on SharePoint annually. So unless you can manage that correctly, your costs are going to spiral. We actually offer a range of technologies. Sorry to sound like Chris Whitty. Next slide, please. Built into on three key platforms: resilience, control, and modernization. And so storage optimization falls within the resilience platform. But as I mentioned, Cloud Essentials really do have an in-depth knowledge of absolutely everything we do. So they are a key partner in not just solutions, but also the services that back these up. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for that intro. And yeah, Roche and Johan are here today to show you that expertise that you mentioned the Cloud Essentials team have. So we're looking forward to hearing from them. But just before we jump in, a quick reminder of who we are at Cloud Essentials. We are a long-standing and dedicated Microsoft 365 partner specialize in the areas of content management. So we help organizations mature their approach in areas like reducing the risk profile of your content in M365, migrating and managing the content cost effectively, and then ultimately opening up the value in content so you can surface it to your business advantage, especially in today's AI landscape. We also cover multiple other areas, so where we have a team of experts, including complex migration projects, backup and retention expertise, which we're obviously going to go through today. Also Power Platform application development, expertise around Azure architecture, and we also delve into the world of discovery as well. So feel free to follow up with us on any of these areas or topics. Now we're going to jump into it, and I'm going to pass you over to the brilliant Roche Wienman. Roche, it's over to you.
Thanks for that great introduction, Gethin. Okay, perfect. Let's jump straight into it. So first, what we're going to chat about is just our document lifecycle stages, and I'm sure most of the content managers are aware of what these stages are, but just to take you through them, our first stage is your generation and editing. That's the creation part of your document lifecycle stages, and that's when the content is uploaded into your environment. After that, we move into your storage, and that's typically where the content is kept and stored, organized, so that you can use it or continue using it within your environment. And then the important part of that is just that continued usage of the content. So that's when users are collaborating on the content, they're sharing it with each other, whether it's internally or externally shared, and also search for it from your SharePoint search index, as well as Copilot. If you've got Copilot within your environment, it will leverage heavily on your search capabilities at the back end to identify content within your environment. The part of your document lifecycle stages that don't get as much attention as it should is the maintenance, as well as the archive and disposal of it. And typical reasons for that generally are because people don't understand what policies need to be set up. So they just set up a blanket retention policy, and that's what we're going to discuss with you today, just to give you a bit of an outline of what types of retention policies are available. But as part of that maintenance, you also need to do regular content audits and then analyze the results of those audits in order for you to redefine what your policies or archive rules might look like in future. Then your archive and disposal stage is where your storage optimization would fit in, because that's where you have to monitor what your storage output is so that you can stay either inside of your quota or reduce it to inside of your quota. And yeah, like I said, that's also part of the stages that don't get as much attention. The reason why those data sprawls happen is because the architecture at the back end was also not set up correctly. And then that means your risk management is also not analyzed. But yeah, we'll get into that detail when we get to the next slides. And that's data sprawl causes. So we split it up into 4 different bubbles. Like I said, retention policies is the first bubble. So if your retention policies aren't set up correctly, it's going to continue retaining your data. So you have to ensure that you've got the correct retention policy set up and or defensible deletion policies to get the content that you no longer need in your environment out of the environment. Second one is versioning. By default, versioning is set to 500 versions per document. So you can think in a heavily collaborated environment, you might reach the 500 mark very, very quickly. And it means that you've got essentially 500 copies of a single document. And then also active and inactive content and rot data. There are not a lot of native ways to monitor these types of content sources. So that's where we leverage tools like AvePoint Opus to identify what the content is. And with that, we then choose whether to either archive it to a different storage location or dispose of it out of your environment if it's no longer needed. But yeah, let's get into the details of that. So just to understand what your SharePoint and on OneDrive version limits looks like. So there are 3 areas where you can define what those settings look like. So from a tenant level, you can set the settings to the lowest value, which is allowed in the GUI, is 100 versions, but that does not mean it's going to trickle down to all your sites. The second level is your site level. You can also set specific version settings on a site level, and then that will push down to the content as well. On a library is the third place that you're able to add your retention settings, and all of these only allow you to do 100 in the GUI, so you would have to use PowerShell scripts at the back end to go even lower than that. But although you can go lower than that, Microsoft does not advise going lower than 50 for specific content types, because it aids in collaboration at the back end. So if you go too low, you might miss some edits and it gets purged out of your environment. Next slide, please. Okay, just to understand versioning at the back end. So the reason why versioning was implemented is to facilitate co-authoring. So if you are working on a document with multiple people, it then creates a version of that document that is linked to each person, just to track the changes that are made to the document. So it keeps a full history and audit trail of what was changed in that document. And also in cases where there are data breaches or ransomware attacks, you also have the flexibility to jump back to a previous version. If it was a wrong edit, then you can just jump back to a previous version, and then you should be okay. So there are two types of versioning within your environment. You've got major versions and you've got minor versions. So major versions jumps from your incrementing between numbers. So it will go version 1, version 2, version 3, and that is normally the default for all document libraries. You've also got minor versions, and that's more versioning for drafting. So if you've got a scenario where you have to edit a document before you can publish it to the next major version, you would use minor versioning, and then increment 1.1, 1.2 up until the point that that draft version has been approved, and then it can be published as a major version within your environment. So just to look at the example that is on the screen to show you what those versions look like. So you can see that version 3, 4, and 5, those were major versions that was applied to the environment, but then they switched from version 8 to a minor version, and that was 8.1. And then when it was restored to a next version, it was restored as version 9. So you'll always keep your previous versions. It's not going to overwrite 8 because you restore to a previous version. It will create the new version on top of that so that you don't lose that full audit trail. But yeah, just looking at this example, you can see on the size that essentially every single version that is created consumes storage within your SharePoint environment. So if you times that by a specific number of your version set, you'll see how that's going to chow up your storage at the back end. Next slide, please. Okay, so we typically break it up into 3 categories. So we've got small files, which are your text documents, basic spreadsheets, compressed images, or email files. They typically are in the size range from 1 to 500 kilobytes, but just to have a look at what impact that has on your storage, if you keep it on your default settings, 500 versions of a document that size is going to consume 245 megabytes in your environment just for that one file. The same with medium files. Medium files are a bit more high res type of document, and that would be your presentations, some audio files, maybe recordings or meeting minutes that are recorded, large spreadsheets, and also large text document that have richer content at the back end. And the size range for those documents are between 500 kilobytes and 100 megabytes. So again, if we go worst case scenario, 500 versions of that document will be 48 gigabytes within your environment. And then for our media companies, our engineering firms that use AutoCAD, set up video files and database files at the back end. These usually range between 100 megabytes and 10 gigabytes. And then again, worst case scenario, just 500 versions of one of those files would consume 4.8 terabyte. And in some instances, that might be your full storage quota. Okay, so this leads us to our first Slido question, and that is, how many versions are hiding in your tenant? So first answer is 500, and that's just the Brave default. Have you set it to less than 500? Have you set it to less than 100, which means you are already optimized, or you're not sure? Just give a couple of minutes for the answers to come in. Okay, let's look at the results. Okay, so we can see already that more than 50% of the users are on the Brave default. We've got a couple of settings that are set to below 500, and then there is 17% that is already optimized. So you've already gone through this exercise. Okay, perfect. I think this is the point where I'm quickly going to hand over to my colleague Johan, which he will take you through all of the retention information. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rishi. I think Rishi touched on it earlier when he discussed the categories that influences your storage when it comes to your M365 environment, and he mentioned retention. So I'm not sure how many of you are aware that you can configure types of retention within Microsoft Purview and then assign those retention settings to locations or files. But specifically focusing on SharePoint and OneDrive, we want to utilize storage optimization. Any files or any library that has got a retention in place automatically gets preservation or library created. And there is where any edited, any versions or any deleted documents are retained for that retention period. So for example, if for a legal or regulatory requirement, you define a retention period of 7 years and apply it to a SharePoint site containing HR or personal information, it means any documents that's stored within that SharePoint site, any document that has been deleted or any versions that's edited in that SharePoint site is then retained for 7 years. And only after 7 years, depending on what the action at the end of retention period is, whether it's automatically deleted or gone through a disposition review, only at that point in time does that version or that file that has been deleted actually gets permanently deleted through the recycle bin process from your tenant. So it really exponentially increases the volume of data that you use in SharePoint because your preservation of library contributes to the volume of SharePoint storage that each site is using. So as I mentioned, there's two types of retention that you can apply to your M365 tenant. The first one is retention policies. That is meant to be used and apply at a location level. So for example, a SharePoint site or mailbox or OneDrive for business locations. And you can assign those policies with adaptive scopes where it's based on user attribute values and group memberships, but also statically assign policies to selection, either user accounts or specific SharePoint sites. So we call it implicit retention policies. Then on the other side, we also have explicit retention functionality, and that is known as retention labels. Similar to sensitivity label for handling encryption and access control, you can also publish retention labels that then users can manually assign to files, emails, and other content, but also apply in an automated fashion, utilizing tunnable classifiers or even Power Automate or event-driven behavior like workflows to then apply retention to files. So for example, an example would be you can apply retention labels to users' files after they've resigned to make sure that all their files are retained for the resignation period. And that can be driven by a resignation workflow that is triggered and integrated with Power Automate. Microsoft builds their retention currently what is known as principles of retention, where, as you can see on screen, retention always wins over deletion. So what that means, if you've got multiple scenarios where a file is where a retention policy and various retention policies or retention labels apply to content, retention always wins. Even if you have a deletion policy defined where emails or files are deleted automatically after a period, if it is in conflict with a retention policy because of a longer period, that file will be retained for legal and discovery purposes, while it will still be deleted from your end user view. So administrators will still be able to discover and find those files within the preservation library, but it will not be in the user's view. So to understand why this affects versions, so I'm going to show you what it means, the two different types of retention. So firstly, retention policies, that works on a location. So here's an example where there's a document library that has got a 5-year retention policy defined to it, but also they've already adjusted the default version limit to 100 versions. But if there's retention policy, those retention limits is essentially ignored. So what that means is as users edits a file in that file version keeps increasing, and it will forever keep increasing over the configured limit, because that retention policy overwrites any of the version limits that have you configured. So implicit retention basically breaks your version control you have available within SharePoint. In contrast, retention labels is where you apply that retention setting at a file level, so explicit retention. So here is a similar document library with a single file which has a 1-year label applied to it, which means that file will be retained for 1 year, or that version will be retained for a period of 1 year. You can see also this library has got a version limit set to 100. So as user starts editing this file version, it will slowly increase until it reaches the version limit count. And if auto purging is configured within the version functionality, if a user makes a new edit on that file, the old version, the first version, is automatically purged. So still allowing for the document to return for, but essentially first version of the file based on your version limit. So if the version limit was 50, that automated purging action will occur with the 51st version of each file. So that's basically just to understand why retention has an impact on SharePoint consumption. And the real world scenario is we've had a few customers that simply edit PowerPoint presentations frequently, and we have seen where a few 100 megs PowerPoint presentation with embedded videos consumes gigabytes of SharePoint storage, because they have got over 150 versions of that single relatively small or medium-sized PowerPoint presentation. So it can quickly balloon and contribute to SharePoint storage, even a small file. So I think that leads us to the next poll. So you can should refresh if you still have the Slido site open on your side, and the new poll will be active. And here we just want to find out what retention settings you currently have configured in your environment. So do you have retention policies, retention labels, a combination of both? And if you are not sure, you can also select not sure. So if you don't mind, if you can please indicate what you have on your tenant. So let's see how the voting goes. I think it's quite often most organizations they don't know exactly what they have configured, and it's one of those implementations where Microsoft doesn't actually have a default configuration in place, and it's really for customers to build and define those as they mature their data lifecycle management functionality with Microsoft Purview. Yeah, a few votes for both, might be one or two. Yeah, so I think when we're looking at the best practice, it's definitely having to combine both retention policies and retention labels, and also extend that integration with third-party archiving and solutions like AvePoint, so you understand the full landscape of the technology you can utilize for managing your retention of your content in SharePoint. So I think I'll hand you back over to Rishi. He'll continue with the journey how you can identify and manage your data. Thanks for sharing.
Good, thank you. Okay, so like I mentioned previously, there are unfortunately no out-of-the-box solutions that you can use to identify what inactive content is. You can use PowerShell script, but they are extremely time-consuming, and it's also difficult to set up and understand the information that it spits out. So that's where we prefer using a solution like AvePoint Opus to help you identify what that information looks like. So you can see the example on the screen over here. It gives you an outline of your inactive data based on the content sources in the containers, and that will cover your team sites, your SharePoint sites, and any sites, Microsoft 365 groups with a site linked to it. Okay, sorry, you can go back. Perfect. Okay. And then what we also like about it is the fact that you can provide parameters to help you identify what your archive or disposition rules should look like within the Opus environment. And that you can see on the modified time range over there, where we selected 10 months to indefinite, and then that gives you an idea of how much storage you'll save out of the environment if you archive any content that's older than 10 months. So it's completely configurable from a parameter perspective. You can set it up on your own parameters, or you can define it based on your retention policies to see what that's going to look like if you apply the policies based on what your retention policies are currently set to. Then it also has capabilities to identify the right data for you. There's nothing more irritating than having to go and sift through thousands and thousands of documents to try and identify which files are redundant, and that's typically files that are over the specific version limit that you've got, and then also obsolete files, and these are files that are no longer supported because they are older versions of files. And then trivial files, which is cached files or historical files that also don't need to be stored within your environment. Again, you can use the parameters to identify based on a specific period. You can split it into your containers. So if you want to look specifically at content within your SharePoint environment, you can filter based on that. And you can also look on based by file size. So for instance, if you want to, for an engineering firm, specifically look at how much content storage is being consumed by your drawing files, then you can click on your drawing box at the bottom over here, and then it will show you specifically how much storage is being consumed by just your drawing files. Okay, but yeah, next what we're going to be chatting about is smart archiving. And again, this is where we're use AvePoint Opus to accomplish this. But you'll see it's sort of a combination of what your retention needs to be set up to with your archive solution at the end of that process in order for the two to work together to optimize your storage going forward. Okay, so this is an example of a client where they were already over their storage quota, where we assisted them to get underneath that storage quota using this combination solution. So you can see from the middle blob, their total usage was 11.6 terabytes, and they were only licensed for 7.8. So that meant that they had to purchase 3.8 additional SharePoint storage in order for them to continue working within their environment. So if you look at the costs for a smaller company, it's it's a lot, because you have to pay $778 per month to use that storage. And this is just to keep you within your quota. Remember, your data is going to continue growing, so you'll have to continue buying additional storage in order for you to continue working within your environment. And then, yeah, just looking at the yearly estimates, that's 10,000, almost 10,000 a year. So what we did for this specific client was we got them into their storage quota by using the archive solution and then shifting the data into a lower cost tier for storage. So you can see we estimated what their growth was going to look like. And remember, this is a minimal case where it's just your 10% growth every year, and we already know that you can grow between 10 and 20% a year. So just looking at what that growth looks like over time, in 10 years time, you're almost triple your amount of storage that you were consuming when you started this process. So the idea is to get you below your storage quota and then continue monitoring that as time goes on, so that it keeps offloading content out of your environment, so that you stay within that quota indefinitely over the next couple of years. And that's the green line. Okay, so next slide or question. Has your organization already purchased additional SharePoint storage? And then the answers are just yes, no, or not sure. Yeah, so we can already see that some of you have been through this problem. So you would have had to buy additional SharePoint storage. Oh, it looks like, okay, there's one that didn't have to. Okay, yeah, so majority had to buy different additional SharePoint storage. Okay, so just doing a cost comparison to show you how much you can save if you archive the content out of your environment. So I based it off of a 5 terabyte over your limit additional storage. So if we look at SharePoint additional storage, which costs 20 cents to the dollar per gigabyte that you purchase, we're already looking at a $958 per month cost. So just moving it to a different tier storage, like your hot, cold, or cool Azure blob storage, you're looking at a significant drop in costs to pay for that additional storage solution. So you can see hot storage is $100, cool is $60, and if you go cold, it's $21. But that's where that decision needs to be made as part of the analysis of your environment, whether you need hot, cold, or cool, because the API calls at the back end differ based on the storage location that you have select. So if you know your content will still be accessed quite frequently, it won't be smart for you to go cold, because then you might have to pay additional costs for the additional API calls that you use within your environment. Okay, so a couple of the other reasons why we choose AvePoint Opus, it's just the intelligent storage optimization, and that automatically moves the content for you to a lower cost storage. You can either choose to purchase their storage, where they then keep it backed up within their environment, or you can choose to store it within your tenant and then create the blob storage. So you've got options there based on pricing. It also reduces your SharePoint storage footprint. When the archive kicks off, you're not going to wait 15 days for that storage to be reduced. As it moves the content out of your environment, you'll immediately start seeing your storage allocation move down. And then, yeah, it frees the capacity so that you don't need to buy any additional SharePoint add-ons. It's also the seamless user interface. So users will still see content within the environment as if it still exists there because it is replaced by a stub. The stub is completely brandable, so you can add your logos in there, but the stub is essentially just to show a user why this content has been archived. So you'll add your policy information in there to say that this file has not been accessed in the past 6 months, so it was moved to a cheaper storage location. What's also great about the stub, just clicking on the stub will give you the option to restore that file, so it doesn't become an IT burden for them to continuously have to restore content back into the environment that the users require. So it also gives power back to the users, and they don't have to feel that their content is missing and it's going to take days for them to get it back. And then also it has no impact on your metadata and search. So as far as Copilot and SharePoint search is concerned, that file still exists within your environment. So if you search for it, it's still going to come back. Then from a governance and compliance perspective, it can integrate with your Purview labels and retention rules. So if you want to have an integrated solution between the two where it retains your information in Purview for a specific period, you can set it up, and then Opus will take over after that retention period has expired. It also provides you with a full audit trail and version control and reporting for your defensible deleted records management. And the content that is archived is still e-discoverable, which is also a bonus. Then it's the reporting capabilities. So you've got dashboards that will help you identify which content is active and inactive. And we did look at that in one of the previous slides. It also gives you insight into potential storage savings based on your library trends and also policy compliance. So you can set up what your current costs are at the back end, and then that will tell you how much you will save if you archive content in the next couple of months. And that also scales to your organizational growth. And like I mentioned previously, the hybrid storage strategy. So you can choose whether you want to do it in your own blob storage or use AvePoint's storage add-on. Okay, yeah, so just to give you an example of what the stubbing solution would look like. So if you've got your SharePoint site and content was identified as something that is archivable, it will move the physical file into your Azure blob storage, but it will leave behind the stub of the file, and then you can see that all of the metadata is kept intact. So again, it's as if the content still lives within your environment and nothing is missing. So it's searchable. Copilot can find the information in the index, so you won't have any issues with that. Okay, and then just to chat about the specific scenario where you have to keep in mind a hybrid type of solution, and what we typically do for customers is set up the combination rule where Purview will then handle your content from an active content perspective. So content that you know is being accessed and used within your environment. So if it is maliciously deleted or accidentally deleted, Purview will snatch that file up so that it doesn't get deleted out of your environment. So you're still able to get it back, but where it needs to take over on the archive platform is where your retention. So you're still retaining the content as a retention policy would, but your retention period just is overtaken by your archive platform. So it doesn't consume storage by keeping the file safe in your environment. Yeah, that's it from my side. Back to you, Gavin.
Great stuff. Thanks, guys. I suppose before we wrap it up, we've been pretty efficient on time today. I want to extend a huge thank you to our expert speakers for their valuable insights throughout today's session. So thanks, Roche and Johan. Special thanks to Dan from AvePoint for joining us and shining a light on, the level of expertise that the Cloud Essentials team have, with the help of fantastic technology. And I guess as we finish up, let's just recap on, some of the main takeaways from me, really, from picking up on what the guys have said today. Proactive data management is absolutely essential for controlling costs. Automation and intelligent tools are your allies for efficiency. So make sure you're leveraging them and also working with the right partner, Cloud Essentials. Align your retention and archiving strategies with your business needs. And then if you're already paying for extra storage, there could be that instant ROI that's waiting for you as well. So important to point out that, the Cloud Essentials team invests, significant effort in understanding business challenges and mapping out the optimal path forward for you. So again, if any of this is of interest, then let's start the discussion and dive a little deeper into where you're at the moment. And then finally, and as a bit of a next step, we're offering a free SharePoint and OneDrive storage assessment for qualifying organizations. So this includes what is a high-level environment assessment with our expert team. It's a storage health feedback and some real-life examples, and then some guidance on how to start your storage optimization journey as well. So if you're interested in that, then reach out to me via email, gethin.davis@cloudessentials.com, and we can set up this session. And on that, thank you to you as an audience. Thanks for your participation in the Slido questions and your honesty. We look forward to carrying on the discussions with you. But for now, thanks very much and see you next time.